audiences. For her, not only does it downgrade the African difference, but it also works to marginalize and ghettoize African music. Dawn refuses to bend to the expectations of world music and continues a practice rooted in African specifics, but also open to the range of experiences and technologies that history has made available to her and her fellow musicians. Enracinement et ouverture, that is rootedness and openness, I believe. Many, if not most African creative practitioners share such perspectives. The pressures on African cultural producers, filmmakers in particular, to jump on the bandwagon of a normative global film culture and to check their local cultures at the door are indeed enormous and seemingly insurmountable. However, a quick look at the recent crop of cultural products from various parts of Africa and her diaspora, and I'm very glad that Mr. Mshidi did invoke the diaspora, because this is really an integral part of Africa today, that when one looks at these products, particularly the relatively new phenomenon of Nollywood, we see compelling instances of creative and productive deployment of individual and local specificities and cultures to navigate the world with confidence and in very unapologetic ways. I see also in these products the magic that can result from a skillful and critical use of new technologies to narrate African experiences in different and more enabling ways, rather than surrender to an overbearing global norm and an attempt to live up to Euro-American and commercial expectations, which could well turn out to be a dead end. I see purposeful and imaginative appropriation of the full range of resources and experiences of Africans, past and present, in their encounters with each other and with others from around the world. Like the late Senegalese writer and filmmaker Ousmane Sembène, many are insisting on the right and imperative of Africans to assume the world from their own diverse positions, to creatively and productively claim and appropriate on their own terms those elements and products of humanity, regardless of origin, that are deemed vital and useful for their own projects. Acts of claiming and appropriation, of course, proceed from positions, various positions and specificities, cultural, geographical, historical, individual, gender, class, race, sexual, etc. And it is from the imprints of the specific that any significant moves towards the global can be made. Africans are historical beings, diverse, dynamic, and always in motion. So also are our cultures. Former President of Senegal, Léopold Senghor, at one point in time, invoked the grand notion of the civilisation de l'universel, that is a civilization of the universal. He also imagined a great global banquet at which all cultures from around the world would answer present with offering specifics to each mutual, specific to each for mutual nourishment of humanity at large. Granted, some may see this as utopian in a contemporary world of predatory zero-sum, winner-take-all capitalist globalization, but I believe that Senghor's metaphor for a global humanism founded on local, national, and regional specificity, a celebration of diversity, parity, and exchange, may have a thing or two to instruct us about the resilience, the generative, and staying power of the local. I want to end by invoking the 2009 TED lecture given by the Nigerian writer Chimamanda Adichie, making a compelling case that stories do matter. Stories, she argues, have power, and she uses the Igbo term nkale to characterize this power of stories. Who tells the story, how, where, and when the story is told are important, she argues. She warns against what she dubs the danger of the single story. Africa has for long been reduced to a single story of backwardness and all of its cognates. As a story and novelist, Chimamanda and her fellow creative practitioners are telling a different story and more complex story of Africa Rising. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Amina, can you come forward? I know that we are now pressed for time, and we will suspend certain things after the presentation so that we can recapture the time. But Amina will give us a sense of the South African coverage of this Africa Rising phenomenon.
Thank you very much. Greetings, esteemed colleagues. It's always good to be here. That's the netizens and the digital natives and all the highway Africans. I hope you're going to have fun and enjoy yourselves the next couple of days. It's difficult to be the last on an esteemed panel to my left, but I'll try and pick up on a few aspects. Where are we? Our colleague from India talked about numbers. In South Africa, we are mere 50 million, speaking 11 languages. How do we communicate with them? Today, we are here, a very esteemed gathering of media practitioners from near and far from around the world. And it's the one place to be, I think, annually. So thank you to Highway Africa and everyone else, sponsors and everyone who's made this possible. On the way here, we were a little bit delayed, and I just have to do some name dropping. We were on a game drive on the way here and looking out for the Big Five. This is just where we are staying, just slightly out of Grahamstown. And why I refer to the Big Five, we are probably talking here about the Big 4 M's or something like that. Esteemed media gathering in the municipality of Makana, in the Eastern Cape, which is regarded as Mandela territory. But it would not be fair to not pause for a moment and think of the recent massacre that we had last month of the Marikana massacre. For those who don't know, this is the mowing down of 34 miners by the Democratic South African Police. Some of these miners are being buried as we speak. Over the weekend, this week, they come from this area. Some are Tembus, some are Pondus, from Mandela land, from our democratic South Africa. Why we are bringing up the example of the miners, it might have made world headlines for some of us who are following the headlines. So it's a local event of miners protesting for better conditions. At a platinum mine, we're probably, I think, the second largest producer of platinum, an indication of our thriving investment or Africa rising, where miners are not living under decent human conditions. We turn the other way. We've perhaps turned a blind eye to some extent if we reflect on our business pages and in Forbes Africa, how well we are doing, how well Africa is rising. But as the media and an advocacy role of the media, should we not question the skilling and reskilling of some of those miners? Should they remain rock drillers and risk life and limb every day? Or could we develop them into manufacturers, designers of expensive jewelry, developing and manufacturing catalytic converters for cars that maybe even they could buy, purchase, and drive? This is just one example. Are we adequately contextualizing it? I think there are many legs to the Marikana massacre, and in some circles which might indicate a little bit of policy analysis, it was referred to by the ruling party as a tragedy. I think it's much more than a tragedy, and we must say so when it is. That is just one example. I think the jury is still out. What happened? Who gave the command to shoot? Fact of the matter is people have lost their lives in a democratic South Africa. That is platinum and investment in South Africa. But some of the recent events this week, we experienced a massive hike in the oil price this week, in petrol price increases. Where does it come from? I've seen various reports, about the history of increases in the dollar exchange rate and the uncertainty in the Middle East and all of those things, but are we adequately contextualizing it? A country like South Africa that got 42% of its oil from Iran, almost overnight in response to pressures from various quarters, whether you call it the West, whether you call it America, whether you call it the EU, all of a sudden we went from 42% imports of oil from Iran to, quote, we don't import any oil from Iran. Where does it come from? What price are we paying? So is it just the fluctuating dollar? Is it just, you know, some of the factors that we have no control over? But that brings us to the uncertainty in the Middle East, for example. We all know that over the past 18 months, Syria has been at war with itself. Thousands of lives have been lost, with seemingly no end in sight. Where is the leadership? Coming to BRICS, South Africa is part of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They constitute BRICS. Are there efforts, attempts, multilateral attempts amongst the BRICS countries to try and find a solution? What messages are we sending and how we vote at the United Nations? Are we taken seriously as a global player that can make a difference? Why are we on multilateral organizations when I think we should perhaps contribute more to conflict resolution? Russia and China are allies of Syria. Russia is reputedly arming the Assad administration. We are part of the BRICS body. Are we going to say something? Are we going to intervene? Are we going to play a role that perhaps some of us expect to play? But coming back to BRICS and how we're covering ourselves, if you start with Brazil, we may have language difficulties, English and Portuguese, but they certainly beat us last week. Our soccer team was beaten 1-0. That's pretty bad, pretty rough. As far as China is concerned, we have thriving relationships, and our colleagues referred to China in Africa. China has been around for a long time, and maybe they have some insights as far as food security is concerned, in addition to securing resources, mineral and otherwise. China is buying up African farms to grow food for Chinese and other communities. China has been in Africa as a developmental partner, but China is buying up chunks of land in Africa. It's all very well. Coming back to South Africa and Africa, we cannot just pay lip service to what is happening out there. We cannot just observe. We cannot just be taking an academic interest in what is happening. Africa is a rich continent. Some of us are wealthier than others. Should we Africans not invest in our own future? We cannot just bank on historical Africa. We also have to be future Africa. I don't think we are doing enough. Of course, we are living in times of recession, and yes, resources are dwindling. I have been around for a while as also a foreign correspondent when the country was teeming with media agencies, spending millions in this country to cover apartheid South Africa and subsequently democratic South Africa. But I bump into some of my former colleagues as correspondents, and those resources have dwindled, they've dried up. Which brings us to, once again, to Africa. Should we not get involved in telling our African story and our South African story with the right kind of perspectives, with the right kind of language? I'm born in South Africa. We speak at least 11 official languages. I myself am not aware of the rich idiom that is taking place right under my nose, right here in the Eastern Cape, or in Zululand, or in the Northern Cape with a language that is dying out, the Ku and the Kwe languages. So if I'm not aware of my rich heritage and culture right here, how can I tell my story to my people? Of course there are others doing it. Of course we are trying to reflect. But I think we need to do a little bit of navel gazing, but refuse to be consumers only. I've just read the dust cover of Africa Rising. We can't just be 900 million consumers. We have to set the agenda as well. We have to take in our rightful role as players and setting the agenda for a future South Africa. I can go in on a lot of details, but I won't. You're welcome, obviously, to pose questions. I don't know if I've caught up with a bit of time. I'm not sure if this is adequate. I can go on for another hour if you like. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amin. I think you, as a last speaker, you have really brought it home in terms of the questions that we should be engaging with throughout the conference of this panel. We are going to commit the first injustice in the conference, which is to deny a discussion because of time. I think this is one of the projects of democratic centralism. So we have decided with Chris that we will break for tea so that we can allow a conversation about these issues. I hope that Chris has an idea of how we can discuss very, very pertinent questions that have been raised about the changing global order, which is not actually changing if you listen to what's happening. So thank you very much for listening, and let's give a round of applause to our panel. And let's give the microphone to Chris.
Thank you. Just 30 seconds. If we could just be still for just 30 seconds. Firstly, let's also thank Depros, our moderator, for a job well done. But also why I'm so grateful to Depros is that he supported